Alrighty, back at you. Dream number two. I'm on page 80. I'm going to read the dream, kind of give you a sense of it overall, but I've written some things on the board about it already. It's a new dream, so it's not a recurrent dream. It's a dream that emerges as new material for analysis and for progress in understanding her unconscious desire and how it's her wishes and her what Freud called libido, which is Latin for desire, what you want, how that was manifesting itself through all these crazy symptoms, including these extreme ones of coughing all the time, but you don't have an infection, pneumonia, or anything. Not being able to talk for like weeks at a time, so-called aphonia, paralysis, neuralgia, like pain in your jaw and your face, can't feel your face, that sort of thing, but you're not on drugs. She develops this crazy stomach pains, and she also at different points has a limp, as though there's something physically wrong with her leg or something like that. Okay, so what do all these things mean? They have no direct physical bodily cause. Not like she was in an accident or someone punched her in the face really hard or pulled out her vocal cords or gave her pneumonia so she would cough. And none of these things have a somatic bodily origin. The origin is in mental life and in symptoms are a way of finding substitute satisfaction. You can't get what you really want, so the symptom is formed to kind of give you a substitute for what you want, but then the substitute becomes debilitating. The desire for the substitute becomes debilitating, and this logic is similar to addiction. You know, you're unhappy. Alcohol's not going to make you happy in a real, genuine, earned way. It's going to make you feel good for a little while, and then you suffer terribly with the hangover or whatever. And people who get addicted to it, the symptom, the thing they were trying to find a substitute for, the misery in their own lives for whatever reasons that are probably not their own fault, that thing becomes the problem itself. Okay, the symptoms develop to give you some sort of substitute satisfaction, but then the symptom itself becomes a problem. All right, so what are the wishes here? Um, the wishes in the dream, and we'll read the dream in a second, so I'm kind of giving away, but just to guide you, the wishes are the wish for her father's death, which is a very common thing in dreams, and for Freud, this speaks to this Oedipal desire in childhood, that we see our parents as lovers, potentially, and then opposite parents as rivals. Children will say this stuff openly, too. I love my dad. I wish mom wasn't around, that kind of thing. Um, and similar concept is sibling rivalry. New baby comes along, the firstborn or the ones who are already there, they've experienced the baby as object of jealousy, and they'll say mean things. They'll say they won't be cool with it, not necessarily. So the wish for his death, and also in a condensed way. The death of him is also not literal but symbolic of this death of her desire for him from childhood. The desire for sex, you'll see the way the dream is read, the imagery in the dream, the geography that's in the dream. Freud calls it a sexual geography. You have this forest that he interprets as sort of the women's genitals in this detailed reading, and then you have this train station, and the train as a phallic symbol, as a penis essentially, and the train is entering the forest and the station. So, and then finally you have this wish, this desire in the dream where she's lost and she's looking for the station. Uh, uh, the imagery reproduces his events at the lake where RK hit on her and she rejected him, and then she tried to walk around the lake, which is supposed to take 2 hours. And the significance of the number 2 is really crucial for all these events that occur. 2 weeks, 2 hours become kind of synonymous in the unconscious, and her desire to break it off with RK, and finally by transference to break it off with Freud. And when she ends the therapy, Freud reads it as she's acting out, she's repeating and getting her revenge again on Eric K. She's not done dealing with wanting to revenge herself on him. And why does she want to revenge herself? Not because, according to Freud, not because she's simply not interested. She wants to revenge herself because she's heard from her friend, this governess who's taking care of Eric K's kids, the K's kids, that he hit on her. And he said, my wife means nothing to me, and all this sort of stuff. And then he used the same line on Dora when they're at the lake, and Dora is upset because that means he's just seducing her and not really caring in this way where he would end his marriage and possibly want to be with her. Okay? So I know that's a lot to take in, but don't worry, it's just all for fun anyways. No final, no test, okay? Unless you want to take it to replace a previous exam grade, but just understand there's going to be grade inflation anyway this semester. Not that I don't already do it. Okay, so this dream is longer. And if you ever have a chance to read, I'm on page 80. If you ever have a chance to read Freud's wonderful book, Interpretation of Dreams, which I have over here. It's in this book, the complete, or the basic writings of Freud. I lost my original copy of this, very sad. With all my hilarious annotations. This book contains some wonderful, great books of Freud's: The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, The Interpretation of Dreams, The Contributions to the Theory of Sex, Wit, and Totem and Taboo, and the History of the Psychoanalytic Movement. So anyways, the majority of the book is taken up with the Interpretation of Dreams, okay? Interpretation of Dreams starts on page 150, and it runs all the way until it takes up like the vast majority of the book. This one, it's a mammoth text. It's really Freud's magnum opus. And I won't bore you going into other books, but I have been reading around in consultation for preparing to teach, as I always do. Rereading some stuff. I showed you Lacan last week. I've been reading. I'll show you one other book I've been looking at. Looking at it so much, there's coffee stains on the front of it now. Freud's, it's an anthology by the biographer Elizabeth Young Burrell, and it has a compilation of texts, but one of the very first ones is a fragment from the Dora case, fragment of analysis of a case of hysteria. And then it has all kinds of other interesting writings about women from really throughout Freud's career, okay? Throughout his career. Freud is famous for this kind of male chauvinist question, what do women want, and not having an answer. And that really is sort of the issue with hysteria, he thinks, is that it's an expression of women's indecision and their desire. All right, so let's go back to this dream now and read it and see what's up with it, okay? A few weeks after her first dream, Dora had her second dream. And when I had dealt with that, the analysis was broken off. She broke up with Freud. And he feels it that way, you guys. That's his countertransference. He feels it like a young boy being dismissed by this older, cool governess chick that was his sister's teacher when they were kids. This dream cannot be made quite so transparent as the first, but it provided welcome confirmation of an assumption that had become necessary about my patient's mental state, filled in a gap in her memory, and allowed deep insight into the origin of another of her symptoms. And that symptom is her feelings of pains in her stomach, okay, which Freud attributes to a desire to be pregnant with Eric K's child, which you'll see it's fascinating. The distance between the events and the symptoms speaks to that. because the symptoms emerged 9 months after that incident at the lake where she slapped him in the face after he tried to kiss her, as if 9 months later she would be giving birth to a baby that they didn't have, okay, but that she wanted to have, according to Freud. Dora said, this is the dream now, I am walking in a town I don't know, and I see streets and squares that are strange to me. Then I reach a house where I'm living. I go to my room and find a letter from Mama there. So she's not at home. She seems to have moved on. This dream it seems to have almost the opposite current of life in it. And you have to understand Freud, thanks to that theory that was prevalent, biogenetic law, that our development needs to progress linearly as creatures to find maturity and happiness and civilization and sophistication, all this stuff. This is now a dream of progress in that sense, and whereas the last dream was one of regression to childhood fantasies about her father. As I left home without my parents' knowledge, says her letter, she did not want to write and tell me that Papa was ill. Now he has died, and she writes, if you like, you can come home. I start out for the station and ask about 100 times, where is the station? I am always told another 5 minutes walk away. Then I see a dense forest ahead of me. I go into it, and there I ask a man whom I meet. He tells me the station is another 2.5 hours walk away. He offers to accompany me. I decline the offer and go on alone. I see the station ahead of me, but I cannot reach it. And I have the usual feeling of anxiety you get in a dream when you are making no progress. Then I am at home. I must have traveled by train in between, but I don't know anything about that. I go into the porter's lodge and ask the porter where our apartment is. The maid opens the door to me and says, your mama and the others have already gone to the cemetery. Okay, so a lot of these different details are going to have, again, multiple significances behind them. That is, they are condensed. They're smashed together, so one little thing means a bunch of different things in terms of her memories and so on. For example, that man she meets who says it's 2.5 hours further, that is both Freud and ENGL again. And her father's death can be read in multiple ways. There's also displacement. Why the 2.5 hours thing? That is, she did get information like that about her when she tried to run away from ENGL and walk back to the lake. She tried to go the long way around, and when someone told her it was that far, she decided to go back. So there is that to it, but then it's also a displacement of the governess that ENGL hit on. She then quit out of frustration because she loved him, but she didn't. She also thought he wasn't serious about her, and she gave 2 weeks' notice. And then it's a displacement also of this plan that Dora has in mind, but that she's not telling Freud yet, which is that from the time she tells him about this dream to when the treatment ends, with her ending the treatment, conscious telling him she was breaking it off, it's 2 weeks. Okay? So there's this displacement of these desires for things to happen about 2 weeks later than she would, then this waiting that she this waiting and decision that she's making is displaced from 2 weeks to 2 hours. Okay, let me just read this first part, and then I'm going to skip ahead and show you some other interesting parts of this. There was some difficulty interpreting this dream as a result of the curious circumstances connected with its content, in which we broke off the analysis. Not everything had been explained, and in addition, there is the fact that my memory has not preserved the sequence of her revelations entirely reliably throughout. For example, if you read to the end, he's constantly introducing. She had the dream multiple times after they started talking about it, and she would remember new things about it as they would interpret it, and it would occur with little variations that proved very significant. Okay, like for example, the 2.5 hours gets reduced to 2 hours, and then it becomes clear the connection between the 2 weeks notice the governess gave, the 2 weeks notice she's giving Freud, the 2 weeks she waited to tell her mom after ENGL tried to kiss her, because she was waiting to see if he would try to reconnect and reach out to her again, assuming that he liked her better than the governess. He would get in touch after 2 weeks. Okay, so I will begin by mentioning the theme that the analysis was following when the dream intervened. For some time, Dora herself had been asking questions about the connection between her actions and the motivations that could be ascribed to them. One of these questions was, again, she's very intelligent, and the case history in a way doesn't really do her justice. And to give you some idea of the intelligence, her brother went on to be a kind of well-known communist politician and Marxist thinker, Otto Bauer. You can look him up. She's mostly just known for this, for its patient. Not a bad thing to be known for, though. One of these questions was, why did I say nothing about the scene by the lake the first day after it? Her second was, why did I then suddenly tell my parents? So that is going to be explained by the 2.5 hours, 2 weeks connection the dream makes manifest. Okay, I thought that we still needed an adequate explanation of why she felt so insulted by RK's advances, particularly as I was beginning to see that to RK himself, his advances to Dora had not been an idle attempt at seduction. Again, you see him sympathizing with RK and with the father, and you wonder why? Don't. He's having countertransference. He is feeling the way he's attributing to RK here, okay? I interpreted her telling her parents about the incident at all as an action that was already influenced by a morbid desire for the revenge. I would expect a normal girl to get over such things by her own efforts. I shall therefore present the material available to me for the analysis of this dream in a rather random order of my memory of it. Okay, and remember, Freud wrote this all down. You can't take notes during a psychoanalytic session. Therapists never take notes and you probably guess why. It's because they think the note taking will influence what the patient's saying in a way that will not be helpful to the patient. It'll be like, oh, they took notes on that. Maybe that means that that's the really fucked up thing, or I must have done something good. It can lead to this sort of, strange dynamic that you don't want. The analyst, the therapist is supposed to try to, as much as possible, even though they're becoming the object of your feelings through transference, remain neutral, remain dispassionate, remain really a mirror. Okay. Let's skip ahead. So again, Freud is going over all these things and just taking line by line almost different parts of the dream as he remembers them, which again speaks to his transferences. And going over what they all meant, that the box obviously is general. The memory opening the book is her opening an encyclopedia. You guys live in the era of the internet and like the infinity of sexual images and ideas and pornography on the internet, but back in the day, the way kids would learn about it was through the encyclopedia. You would be able to read about sex we went so far as like that was a motivating factor in a lot of teenagers in the upper class learning Latin, because you could then read about sex in all these old Latin texts and scientific terminology and so on. But where I want to turn now is let's just go to this one famous passage kind of near the end, and then we'll read the breakup scene, and then we'll stop, okay? Or I'll do one last little short video on transference, and I promise it'll be short. So I'm on page 86 now, bottom 86. She sees herself particularly clearly climbing the stairs. Okay, so this is from the dream. She's walking up these stairs. What's that about? And this gets into this weird complex of symptoms. And Freud's going to try to resolve the symptoms by explaining their origin and then communicating that to her in a way that once she understands where it comes from, maybe she won't have the symptoms anymore. Okay? I naturally wanted a reason for that fragment that she clearly particularly climbing the stairs. I could easily dismiss her objection to the effect that she had to go upstairs anyway to reach her family's apartment on the upper floor by saying that If in her dream she could travel from an unknown town to Vienna and forget the railway journey, she could also ignore going up the stairs in her dream, right? So the dream just skips over the whole train journey, but it remembers this going up the stairs. So that shows you that there's something behind the stair image that's important, that needs to be remembered, recalled by her. She then went on after the appendicitis, and he has to encourage her in this. After her appendicitis, she had her appendix out. She said she had had difficulty in walking because her right foot dragged. Then that went on for a long time, so she avoided flights of stairs where she could. Even now, so in the dream, she's cured of the symptom. Interesting. Even now, and again, you see the transposition of opposites. In the dream, she goes up the stairs easily. In reality, the symptom behind it is that she can only do that with difficulty. Even now, her foot sometimes dragged. The doctors she had consulted at her father's wishes had puzzled over this very unusual legacy of appendicitis, especially as the pain in her body had not reappeared and was nothing to do with the dragging of her foot. It was therefore a genuinely hysterical symptom. That is one that's has no bodily origin. There was that, but then she's reanimated this symptom that had an origin in a new way. Okay? To cathect, to give body, literally, in the leg, to her wishes, her unconscious desires. And you could think of a leg that's dragging. Sorry, I'm getting a text. A leg that's dragging like that, you could think of it as a phallus, okay, as an erect penis and so on. But going up the stairs is going to be a different thing here, okay? It was therefore a genuine hysterical symptom. While the fever she suffered at the time, that is when she had appendicitis, may have had an organic cause, perhaps an influenza infection, without any particular localization, which is a frequent occurrence, we could be certain that the neurosis had taken over a random factor in order to use it as one of its own of expressing itself. She had created an illness for herself after reading about it in the encyclopedia and being punished for that. She had to tell herself that her punishment could not possibly be for reading this harmless article, but had come about through displacement, whereby she was using it to hide the reading of different, more suspect material at the same time. Perhaps I might yet discover what subjects she had been reading about, and they probably, as Freud guesses, have to do with sexuality. What did the condition that aimed to imitate paratyphalitis, that is the inflammation of the tissue around the appendix, mean in Dora's case? The aftermath of her infection, the dragging of one leg, which did not really follow on from paratyphalitis, must conform better to hidden and perhaps sexual significance of the clinical picture. Once explained, it could cast light on the meaning I was looking for. I tried to gain access to the puzzle. Dora's account of the dream had mentioned things. Time is not insignificant in all biological processes. So I asked when she suffered from appendicitis, before or after the scene at the lake. Her answer, resolving all difficulties at once, was 9 months later. So you see the limping, the pains in her abdomen from the appendicitis, quote unquote. She didn't have it out, but it's like inflammation of it. They're 9 months later. They're mimicking the effects of being 9 months pregnant, like that you would limp around, that she wanted. And it's 9 months since that last time RK sort of proposed his intentions to her, and she rejected him out of jealousy. Okay, this meant a great deal. The alleged appendicitis had thus realized a childbirth fantasy. With a few means at my patient's command, her period pains and menstrual bleeding. Of course, she knew the significance of that mention of 9 months and could not deny the probability that she had been reading about pregnancy and childbirth in the encyclopedia at the time. But what about dragging her leg? I could now venture on guessing. She was walking in the way you do when you stumble after missing a step, taking a wrong step. Aha. This symbolism, the wrong step, like she messed up. She shouldn't have smacked RK's face. She should have fallen into his arms. And kissed him passionately. Okay, and you can see Freud's countertransference in that's unconsciously kind of how he's feeling about her too. All right, and he thinks of her leaving him, breaking it off with him, as the wrong step as well. Okay, I could now venture on guessing. Sorry, how and she would indeed have taken a wrong step if she had found herself giving birth 9 months after the scene by the lake. However, I had to ask something else. I am convinced that one develops such symptoms only when there is childhood precedent for them. Again, back to the depth, and that's another name for Freudian thought, depth psychology. It has to go back to childhood. Memories created by later impressions do not, as I find I have to say, judging by my experience so far, have the strength to express themselves as symptoms. Hope to, I hardly dare hope that she would give me the material from her childhood that I wanted, for although I would like to believe that her statement above is always true, I cannot yet really say so. Here, however, I had confirmation once. Yes, she had once taken a wrong step as a child when her family were living in B. She had slipped and missed the steps going downstairs. Her foot, the same foot that she dragged later, swelled up and had to be bandaged, and she lay in bed resting for several weeks. This happened a short time before her nervous asthma set in her 8th year of life. So the hurting her foot is she's reliving a moment in childhood prior to the first formation of a lot of her other symptoms, like the asthma, the coughing, the bedwetting, all the stuff that then is being replayed 10 years later in adolescence. Now I have to exploit the evidence provided by this fantasy. If you had to give birth 9 months after the scene by the lake, I suggested, and then lived to this day with the consequences of taking the wrong step, it shows that in your unconscious mind you regretted the outcome of that scene. So you corrected it with your unconscious thinking. The precondition of your childbirth fantasy is that something happened before it, and that at the same time you had the first-hand experience of everything of which you had to glean knowledge from the encyclopedia. You see that your love for ENGL did not come to an end with the scene, and that as I have claimed, it continues to this day, although unknown to you yourself. She no longer contradicted me. The work of elucidating the second dream, and you can read in the notes here all these other connections with the 2 hours and everything I was mentioning. The work of elucidating syndrome had taken up 2 sessions. When after the end of the second session I expressed satisfaction with what had been, she replied disparagingly, "What came of all that?" I felt that she was preparing me to hear further revelations. And now this next scene, and then I'll stop, is when she breaks up with him, and he repeats it almost verbatim from memory, and you can tell it hurt his feelings, professionally, but also there's countertransference here. Okay, she reminds him of women in his past, women that he probably loved to some degree. At our third sitting, she said, as she came in, "Doctor, you're aware, aren't you, that this is the last time I'm coming to see you?" Breaking up with him. "I can't be aware of it when you haven't told me so." "Well, I made up my mind to go through with it until the new year. It's December 31st when they meet here. They've been seeing each other since October. It's a brief affair." But I'm not waiting for a cure any longer. You know that you are always free to leave the analysis. But we still have work to do today. When did you come to this decision? 14 days ago, I think. That sounds like a maid or governess giving 2 weeks' notice. There was a governess who did give notice at the K's when I visited them at the lakeside. "Oh, you haven't told me that before. Please let me know." She was a young girl, engaged, and this is where, again, he hits on, I won't bore you with it, but he hits upon this profound point, which is that this governess was hit on in the same way, and she told Dora about it. Dora then hears the same line from ENGL about how his marriage means nothing, and she slaps his face. She's like, "I'm not some governess. I'm me. I'm your love. Like, you're supposed to have something special for me. Not this. No, don't recycle that line on me." And then the governess gives 2 weeks, and then she gives 2 weeks. She gives him 2 weeks to get back in touch, and when he doesn't, she tells her mom and tells her dad and sort of poisons the whole situation and the possibility with him, and then lives to regret it, and fantasizes unconsciously through the body, through the symptoms of having his baby 9 months later and all this sort of stuff. Okay, so this is a wonderful part, and we'll come back and we'll read the afterword, and the afterword is extraordinary. It does bring up Freud's concept of transference, and it also hits on some really astonishing, almost like this really is kind of like a short novel, what we call a novella. Some really astonishing events that happen after the treatment is over, because again, it's been about 5 years since Freud saw her. 4 years and change. 4 years. The book, the afterwards, written much later, the very end of it especially, again, the case is October to January 1900 and 1901, and then the book's published in 1905. But most of it was written up really right after the case was over, because otherwise he was going to forget it. Okay, I'll come back with one last video.